Everybody, and welcome to the webinar. Take a few minutes to grab a pen and paper because you're going to want to take some notes for this one. Please close all of your tabs and make sure you're in a quiet room because we're going to cover a lot of important points in a short amount of time. A little bit about me. I'm one of the co-founders of Redstage in 2009. I've been involved in a few e-commerce startups before then and have since been sort of leading the charge to create B2B's digital leaders in e-commerce. We've got a long tenure in e-commerce, a number of e-commerce experts, and that's our big specialty. So our team does a great job of tracking changes in the industry, trends, and you may have seen some of our recent reports about new consumer habits as well. In this webinar, we're going to discuss some of the recent changes in the market, what's happening to B2B, what are the trends, what are the threats, and what are the challenges. We'll also run through the business processes companies are changing to take advantage of these new opportunities, and we'll dive into some of the pros and cons of each to find the best strategies. Lastly, I'll show you two examples of customers of ours that have been leveraging some of these strategies to take advantage and grow their business. These are multi-billion-dollar organizations, so we're talking about some real science that's going on here. And we'll talk about how some people are really changing the game for their industries and setting the tone. If you have any questions, feel free to send us a note at any point during the webinar, and we'll try to address each of your questions. So let's talk a little bit first about the B2B landscape. Why is the B2B industry one of the fastest, if not the fastest, digital transformations that sort of has ever happened in technology? And part of it is this overall macroeconomic force of the changing in demographics in the buyers, right? So we talk a lot about millennials in e-commerce and trends in business, but this really is one of the drivers of how dramatically the B2B landscape is changing. So millennials are already the largest generation in the workforce. A lot of people don't know that. And by 2025, millennials would be 75% of the workforce. So these are people that are digitally native, right? That means a vast majority of these people probably started their first relationship through a text message or instant message of some sort. These are people that are used to communicating digitally and creating relationships and conversations digitally. And for millennials, a digital conversation is just as important, or it's just another mode of communication. So now, how does this apply to the B2B market? So now more than 46% of all B2B purchases are made by millennials, and the latest stat that we have that targets this specifically is back from 2018. So we can expect to be that we can expect that to be higher. 69% of millennials say that the ease of doing business is why they choose the companies that they work with, right? So we're talking about sort of breaking the mold of your standard account manager and client relationship, right? Now, and we'll go into a little bit more of what that means in the future and some examples. We also have the threat of Amazon coming in to a lot of businesses, right? Amazon Business is projected by Bank of America to take 10% of the US market for B2B basically without even trying, okay? So, and they are, as you've seen in the retail, in the B2C market, there is really no sector that is safe from Amazon. And speaking of the influence in these marketplaces, we had one of our potential customers come to us, and they were in the hazardous chemicals industry, and they talked that their market was specific, their market was different. Some of these macroeconomic forces were not going to influence them, but we actually came and showed them one of their competitors listing one of their products, a 55-gallon drum of chemicals, on Amazon Business. So what does this mean? What does this marketplace trends actually mean? Well, when you are starting to list your products on a marketplace, you lose the differentiation of your products, right? If you go on a marketplace and all people are seeing is the SKU, the quantity, and how much it costs, you're now in a commoditized market. People are searching based on the attributes that are available in that marketplace. Now, what we're seeing is we're seeing industry leaders getting ahead of this trend, not waiting until Amazon is taking the market, or Alibaba even. Let's talk about like Honeywell or the aerospace industry. Honeywell, Aero Exchange, they're marketplaces now that products have to be listed on. If you're familiar with the aerospace industry, a lot of aerospace companies won't even do business with you unless you're listed on, say, Air Exchange or a marketplace like Honeywell, and that's where they're going to do all their purchasing from. So what do we think happens if you're forced to put all of your products on a marketplace, and the attributes that they want you to show are shown, right? Those are the only things that you can differentiate yourself on, and you completely lose that conversation. You're so far from that account manager having a conversation with the buyer to talk about the differentiators of your product. Now, what's happening is the industry leaders who are creating these marketplaces, they get to control the conversation, right? So they get to display products that is advantageous to them. And you'll see these industry leaders coming out saying that they're really doing something for the whole marketplace. They want to add pricing transparency. They want to make it easier for the buyers, and they want to set a standard, and they're willing to spread their technology around for everybody to use. And that might take some small commission or small fees, but really they're gaining control of the market. So let's look at some stats of the B2B market as a whole right now. Right, we're talking about 73% of B2B sellers sell through e-commerce or online markets portals today. That's fairly low. 86% of US-based B2B companies with over 500 million in annual sales have already implemented. 80% of companies expect to be disrupted by digitally enabled competitors within the next 5 years. So there is still some room, but we're starting to get to a curve where piece of the curve where people have already thought through these strategies, have implemented or are implementing. That means if we're late to the game at this point, we have a lot of catch up to do. And that's why, we're talking about the speed at which this digital transformation is happening, guided by that change in demographics, is really accelerating this process. We're starting to see some of the results of this digital transformation, where the B2B e-commerce sales are growing 7x faster than any other electronic channel, and the B2B market will actually be running at a rate of twice the size of the B2C market by dollar value. Okay, that's even faster than we expected it to eclipse. The end result, according to a study by McKinsey, is that the leaders in the digital transformation of e-commerce are vastly outperforming their competitors. We have some new customer habits that we also need to look through, and that's again based on that change in demographic. And really what we're looking at is the buyers are starting to prefer to do business with a B2B business with companies that have a good e-commerce presence, right? We can distill it down into that. Millennials and younger generation digital natives, they don't like calling people. They don't like being sold to by a person. There's two areas where they might really be looking for B2B transactions or information. They either are looking to maybe place an order, reorder, or new product discovery, or for a regular situation that they have often, or they're looking to do some research for, say, a new project, right? And if they're doing research for a new project, they might be, up at midnight trying to wrap up a presentation that they have to give the next morning to their boss about what components that they need to add in the development for this new manufacturing process, whatever it may be. And all of a sudden, you'll find that you might have a 20-year relationship with that customer, but if they can't find the exact specifications online of what the components that they need, there's no loyalty there. They'll go right to a competitor and put that competitor's product into their presentation, which could be a catalyst to overturning your entire relationship. Now, this is another interesting one where we're talking about how much of B2B buying happens mobily. Like, what the natural expectation would be that desktop, people are going to be doing their purchasing at work, and the desktop would be the main mode of doing that. Now, again, this is influenced by many things like product research, doing work at home, doing things on the go. We need to be investing in the mobile piece of the business more than we ever thought we would. Okay, now let's talk about some of the things that we observe. So we talked about some macro influences. Let's talk about some of the things that we specifically observe in the market with our clients and the people that come and we do consulting for. So we did a survey of our top customers, and there was definitely some major commonality in what they needed. One of the first things that they needed was industry-leading platform expertise, right? So when we talk about platform, we're talking about e-commerce platforms, meaning, let's say, Shopify, BigCommerce, Salesforce Commerce Cloud, Magento Enterprise, Magento Commerce. These are all platforms that we use. These are some of the tools in our toolbox for digital transformation. Now, the reason that they ask us for industry-leading platform expertise is because a lot of our companies, we work with generally mid-sized to large enterprises, and a lot of enterprises, they have a lot of internal capabilities in their IT team. Their big core competences in maybe their ERP system, like SAP or Dynamics, CRM, middleware, so for their different communications. They have field reps, they might have technology around that, point of sale systems. They have a big staff to support these platforms, but this digital transformation in terms of e-commerce is a bit new, and there's a whole new suite of technology around it, right? You have your e-commerce platform, and then you have other platforms that might be integrated, like marketing technologies and product information management technologies. And the core IT team, obviously gets a little bit nervous about this because it's not one of their core competencies, and there's a little bit of uncertainty of, do they have to take it on? Do they have to own it? Who's providing support for this platform? And how much is it going to cost them? That kind of thing. So they generally require of us, their e-commerce consulting partner and systems integration partner, we're industry leading in that platform expertise, and they can rely on us to be implementing solutions that are going to be stable for them in the future, so that they're not going to have a big, carrying a big bag at the end of this transformation. They also are asking us for a very high level of e-commerce transformation expertise. So that means, one of our clients put a quote here, said, our teams don't know what they're doing and they don't know what they should be doing, because e-commerce is quite a bit of a transformation from the traditional model, right? There's sales teams that are involved with certain relationships, and then we need to talk about customer service. How do we deal with people calling about their shipments, people calling customer service lines looking for different types of products? Like, what is the change in teams, and how do those teams interact with customer service technologies? How do you have a seamless experience between a customer that asks something on a live chat versus an email versus calling in versus talking to an account rep? Customers expect today to be able to continue the conversation that they started having with your business on one channel on another channel, right? So we want to make sure that we are setting teams up for success and not failure through this process. One other main trend or kind of influence here that we see is centralizing versus decentralizing your e-commerce transformation. Let me try to boil that down into a nutshell. Through many of the companies we work with, they have multiple business units, multiple brands, or multiple reasons that their e-commerce operations could be segmented or centralized. And that's from a team perspective and a technology perspective. So, for example, you might have a bunch of different brands under your umbrella, or you might have one brand, but that brand is separated into different business units for different products or services that they sell. So the question is, what are the pros and cons? Do we centralize the technology? Do we have one e-commerce platform? Do we have one e-commerce team? Do we have one customer service team? And that's spread out, and then all the divisions or business units get to leverage that? Or do we decentralize it, meaning that each business unit is responsible for their own. So let's talk about one versus the other. So centralization, you're going to get a lower total cost of ownership organization-wide, right? Because you're going to have one platform, one investment. Many business units will require the same functionality. You know, there's kind of an 80-20 rule where between business units, 80% of the functionality is going to be common, maybe 20% of it is going to be unique, and you know, could be even less than that. But there's some major cons here. The business units will have to wait in line for new functionality, right? And there could be contingencies between business units that cause frustration. For instance, you know, you've got one roadmap for your transformation, right? And you've got a certain set of functionality and enhancements. And business unit, you have to decide who gets prioritized and how, and where they get in the pecking order. So you might have the main transformation timeline might have a certain set of priorities, but if you're sitting inside one of these business units, something that's really important to make your business move forward, it might be very frustrating if you get slotted in 9 months later, right? And then from a contingency standpoint, if we have to make if we're making multiple launches of features and functionality sets, or even fixes, integrations, things like that, then that could cause some frustration by hanging up something that's going on in another business unit. Now, if we talk about decentralizing, excuse me, obviously each business unit can move faster because they're independent. They set their own roadmap, so they're very nimble. It's a little bit more like a startup kind of culture. But the cons are you have a much higher overall budget because everything you implement, you have to implement multiple times. You're maintaining infrastructure for technology and people for multiple times. There's a lot of redundancy here. The other thing that happens is business units don't always learn from the others. So they will make the same mistake over and over and over again, right? And then there's one other major one when we talk about data. We're just going to touch upon data here for a second. Customer data is so core and important and being seen as an asset to organizations. And if you don't have centralization, sometimes it can be hard to have a centralized view of your customer data and personalization across business units. Does my interaction as a customer translate from whether I'm buying coffee or if I'm buying spices from a particular company, for instance? So one of, you know, in the construction industry in particular, 94% of professionals said their main challenge was getting correct and complete client data in a single system, having a single source of truth. And we hear that very often. We hear that a lot, that especially larger enterprises, they have all these systems and they're collecting all this data about their customers, but they can't leverage it to create a unified customer experience or do more advanced artificial intelligence or personalization because there's no single source of truth. They might have conflicting data, and there might be some pieces that are in fact actually out of date. So there's a bit of a hybrid approach for this centralization or decentralization. What you can do is you can kind of have a bit of a business in a box concept, where some business units that are less sophisticated, they might be just starting out in their digital transformation journey. They get a certain set of features, right? And then there might be certain wiggle room of where you might be able to add or subtract things for them in particular. But they're less sophisticated yet. They're testing it out. They might not know exactly what they need yet. So giving them a set of tools or an upgraded set of tools is much better than the space they were. And also, they don't have to worry about having the same knowledge on spend, and you know, the risk is a lot less for them, for that business in a box. Then what can be changed is the criteria on when a business unit graduates from a business in a box to branching off onto their own, right? So if they start to evolve and they start to feel that the pace that the business isn't, they're growing faster than the trajectory of the river that they're swimming in, and swimming upstream or downstream or whatever isn't working for them anymore. There could be some criteria where they branch off and the environment is duplicated for them, and the rest of the environment is stripped out so that they can go it alone. And we see that pretty often. We especially see it with acquisitions that a particular company might be making for smaller companies, which will be in various states of e-commerce advancement. Another trend that we see that often happens is when people start their e-commerce transformation, they're able to serve clients that are smaller than they normally would be able to serve. This is especially true in B2B because a lot of B2B companies are really only set up to be able to handle large organizations. So just from a cost perspective, you've got an account manager that might be highly paid, the support for that client, the type of deliveries, it's all set and tailored for large orders, large businesses. But there may be many smaller businesses that would be perfect customers, but you're relying on somebody downstream to deal with them. Well, e-commerce starts to change the cost basis, and it also starts to change the efficiency of doing slightly smaller transactions. So, for instance, if you were only working with major retail chains before that had hundreds or thousands of stores, you might be able to now accept applications to do business from stores that maybe have a chain of 2 or 3 or 4 people, and they can go through a somewhat automated process to get approved. And then when the ordering process goes through, a lot of their paperwork is already dealt with, and you've already got some efficiencies in your fulfillment set up through your fulfillment technology through e-commerce. So it can actually open up a whole market that you didn't have before, and we see a lot of companies taking advantage of that, and even carving out maybe separate divisions that are tailored to serving that new market. We also see a lot of talk of the sales team, and there's some fear that the sales team will be replaced, like the computers are coming to take our jobs, and there's a huge resistance, especially if the organization is largely sales driven, right? You have organizations that are a little bit more sales driven, a little bit more operations driven. The sales driven organizations can see some major threats here, where e-commerce is going to be doing their work, you're going to slim down the sales team, that kind of thing. Well, what we try to do is we want to try to get a best of both worlds thing here. Is salespeople are expensive, right? The reason that you can't do things like work with smaller businesses or certain expansion projects that you want is that your sales team is a very expensive team, and we want the sales team to be working on the things that make them most productive, right? So if they're answering the phone just to take a reorder and spending half their day doing that, that can be done automatically, and we can even have systems that are automatically following up, that intelligently figure out, hey, this Joe usually orders about once every month, and he hasn't ordered for 2 months. We need to make sure that we get that order flow going again. And an account manager might not be able to have that insight into all of his customers, but we can start automating some of that retention strategy. We can start automating subscriptions, changing out orders in in regular orders that come out. We can automate a lot of that so that the account manager can be doing more higher level revenue generating activities, like pervading further into the business, looking at more opportunities of where they can take a bigger chunk of the pie. What other products can they sell? Those are activities that add a lot more value than something that the system can do for you, right? So we want to do things like automating product discovery. The account managers, sales teams might not be able to work with every customer to keep them abreast of all of the new products that are coming out and what they should be looking at. We can automate some of that. We can automate reordering. We can handle mobile on-the-go ordering. And the big thing is, make sure that this sales rep, that's his business, right? That's the his or her business. That's their client, and they should be getting attribution for those orders. Now, you may want to set the attribution model, and it may make sense to make a slightly different structure, but again, it's about let her focus on those. Let the sales rep focus on those higher impact activities. We also see a lot of struggles. We talked a little bit about kind of a single view of your customer base and customer data and how important that is, but just across the board, one of the trends we see is everybody's talking about middleware, integrations between their systems. How do they marry? One system talks about something this way, one system talks about it this way. What is the system source of truth? How do I get my data out? And this gets especially challenging with some B2B businesses that have legacy systems. I mean, we're working with some companies that their ERP is still built from the 70s and they're continuing it running. We've got some industry-specific ERP systems that may or may, not play nicely with other systems. So those are all a consideration and really should be thought up front in any type of e-commerce transformation. What is the state now, and what is the future state? We'll talk about two examples here. One is, we'll say, is a multi-billion-dollar organization. They had multiple business units. They really made it one of their priorities across the organization to bring a culture of e-commerce into the organization, which was great. And just launching a few sites, they were able to bring in an additional tens of millions of dollars in revenue by just sort of latent demand of what was out there and things that they could automate. And this is another example of a company bringing smaller, being able to target smaller businesses, and they were actually able to pick up millions of dollars in business from that market. Now, this is also an example of a client that really struggled with the centralizing and decentralizing conversation. Started out decentralized because some business units actually started with a more e-commerce first strategy as they were being spun off. And then it moved, the attempt was made to move to a more unifying e-commerce strategy so that they could get all the benefits of the cost savings of platform, and they could bring more business. The theory was they could bring more business units online faster by having that business in a box concept. And what was determined really is there was that struggle of business units that were already in e-commerce were being kind of hurt or hindered by the larger initiatives of the group, and it really stifled their growth, and their growth trajectory could have looked very differently. So this is where we helped, this is a case where we helped formulate one of those hybrid approach strategies. Then you have another interesting one here. At Redstage, we do a lot of work in engineering and construction, aerospace and defense, life sciences in particular. So a lot of these science and engineering focused industries. And B2B e-commerce doesn't always have to be a traditional, Amazon-like approach. So for instance, for one of our customers, we are connecting doctors with being able to order for durable medical equipment on behalf of their customers. And then this requires multiple steps and approvals in the process and multiple parties. And at the end of the day, this is still, a commerce transaction. There is money that ultimately changes hands from this, but the system before used to be very manual, and it was tracked by people on the phone, and there was a very high failure rate for these orders actually going through. What was happening is patients were having to wait for equipment that they needed. So this is basically a B2B commerce portal that facilitates these transactions. So we also see the trend of sort of less traditional retail, or less traditional B2B even, moving online to help facilitate and help facilitate commerce. All right, thanks everybody. That's what we have for you today. Usually we end these webinars with having some free consultation sessions to meet with us after, but I found out for this one that we are actually booked completely solid for the next 2 weeks. If you're interested in getting a consultation with us anyway, we will try to find some space. Look, we really want to be opening up these conversations and having them. Just being told that we are pretty booked at the moment. So we have an email address on the screen for Don Pingaro, is dpingaro@redstage.com. Thanks again for watching the webinar. I hope we showed you a few things today to stay up to date with the trends and challenges in the B2B market. And thank you very much, everybody.